Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Today we are going to be talking about Alec Baldwin. I would have much preferred doing a sort of scripted episode that is synced and edited, but the script was so long, it would have been a monster. It would have taken the whole day to do. So that's why I'm doing a live. Actually, not really in the mood to do a live. The reason why I'm wearing black is so that you don't have this sort of weird light going on. I'm just sort of seeing whether that works given the background. So that's kind of the idea. I'm not trying to go after a particular look. I'm just trying to make the whole thing work a little bit better without the glitches. So quite a lot is happening in true crime at the moment. Quite a lot is happening in the world at the moment, but certainly in terms of true crime, there's a lot going on. In terms of Gabby Petito, the Lifetime movie is about to come out, and you may or may not be aware there's quite a lot of opprobrium. There's a lot of people upset that it's too soon. You know, it's like a year later, this is much too soon. This is something I've definitely lived with as a true crime author over the past 10 years. As an author, I appreciate um, documentaries and dramatizations, whether it's to figure out that that's not what happened, or that part I didn't know, or that's quite interesting. The dramatizations are always helpful for someone who's an investigative person in this sort of genre, right? But it's just quite interesting how you have people feeling, wow, it's way too soon. And I think to some extent it's deferring to the family because the family are still grieving. But if you apply that same thing, say, to Kylie Rodney, then it's kind of like, well, isn't it too soon to be still talking about the case? And isn't it been too soon to be speculating the way we've seen the speculation going? And wasn't it too soon to say it was suspicious the moment you came out the water? So anyway, that's another case. Then you've got Letitia Stork. I don't know if you guys know. I wrote a book about that case. That's like a case that just doesn't want to go to trial. First, it was the virus. Right now, Letitia's suing. I'm not quite sure if it's the. Not sure who she would be suing. She's suing about the fact that the food she's getting isn't kosher. So I'm not sure if that's the Department of Correctionals or not sure who she's suing, but that case like just doesn't want to go to trial. So there's definitely not a too soon going on in that case. Then of course there's Caitlin Armstrong, and um, the Last Ride documentary's just come out. Now, would you say that that was too soon? That case hasn't even gone to trial. Would you say that is too soon? And then, of course, Alec Baldwin. And if you apply again that whole idea, wow, it's too soon, it's too soon. It feels like charges, the investigation, things that have happened in the Baldwin saga have taken kind of a long time. Do you guys agree with that? Good to see you, Sky. Thanks for that. SM Kovalinsky, Mel Miller, Zenaida, Stephanie. Good to see all of you. So it's just quite interesting when you apply things like it's too soon, cross cases, how that sort of plays out. It sort of shows you how we feel regarding different things. And I'm going to be coming back to Gabby Petito. It's actually amazing how people are just not interested in Gabby Petito a year later. Remember how much we cared a year ago? Where's that feeling now? You know, it's like you care. Well, how much do you care? Well, I think a year later you should still care. You should still be paying attention. The worst thing for me in true crime is a case that doesn't get someone's attention. Um, Important evidence that is overlooked, and thus a case goes cold. That's the worst possible. That's the worst case scenario. We're sort of seeing something like that in the Summer Wells case. The worst thing is that you don't pay attention. But it feels like another worse thing is that you do pay attention, you pay too much attention, right? And I think it's also relative. It's relative where you are, who you are, what side you're on, all that kind of thing. Okay, so the woman on my right, as you are viewing this, is Helena Hutchins. She died on the 21st of October in a small wooden church where she was working as a cinematographer on the set of Rust. And that is what you're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the Rust incident, but we're also going to be dealing with the media narrative, the sort of overarching media narrative, and kind of asking, what's the authentic narrative to the story vis-a-vis the media narrative? What has actually been playing out in the media narrative over the past year? And you'll see it's quite an interesting line of investigation. Something I've actually done in most of the books I've written is I do go through, because there are various narratives in true crime within a true crime case. There's the legal narrative, there's the prosecution's narrative, there's the defense narrative, there's the, as I say, the media narrative. Then there are sometimes also conspiracy theories and so on. But there is often a narrative and also a counter narrative. And then you've got to ask, well, what's actually true here? What's real? Okay. So that actually comes from Alina's Instagram, and it's a photo of the setting in New Mexico on set, and obviously the sun going down. I think this was taken a couple of days before she actually died. So Alec Baldwin's attorney has very recently said, please, no unfounded speculation and innuendo. The irony of that to me is kind of incredible. You know, now that charges have finally been acknowledged as possibly being in the pipeline against Alec Baldwin, now there shouldn't be unfounded speculation and innuendo. Baldwin himself has been fueling plenty of speculation around his innocence and the innuendo around the guilt of certain others. Remember him saying, someone is responsible, but I know it's not me. Doesn't that sound like innuendo? And that was from December 3rd. That was where Baldwin spent around an hour pleading his case for why he couldn't be responsible. And it's that interview that actually pricked my true crime ears, that there was more to what didn't seem a terribly big or intriguing deal than meets the eye. So if it wasn't for that interview, the December 3rd interview on ABC, I probably wouldn't even have covered this case. But when I saw that, my sort of cockpit light sort of lit up. If you guys are interested in the coverage I've done, you can have a look at this playlist. There are 82 videos. I'll put a link in chat if you guys haven't seen it or aren't aware of it. 82 videos just dealing with the, well, what happened there? Just dealing with the unfolding of the narrative, right? Okay. So, let's kind of get going here. About a month later, so think about December 3rd was about 11 months ago, but about a month after that December 3rd interview, the 63-year-old Alec Baldwin went on his Instagram to say that any suggestion that he's been evasive with investigators was a lie. So that was kind of what was going on sort of at that point, was some people were kind of accusing him, or there was whispers and talk that he wasn't cooperating. And so he addressed that in this January 8 video on Instagram. You can see it's got almost 850,000 views. Quite a lot of people paid attention to that. And so those 844,271 people heard him basically say, any suggestion that he's been evasive was a lie. And then he also said, of course, we're going to comply 1,000% with all that. And then a week later, and this is about 3 months after the incident, Baldwin handed his phone over to the investigators, right? He'd actually had his phone sort of all that time. And presumably he was also, what's the word? He was also Instagramming with that phone, one would assume. That's the 15th of January. I'm not sure if you can see the date there. Can I blow it up? 15th of January. Okay. I think it's one thing to tell you what the matrix is as, and that's the media matrix, as Morpheus would say, in the matrix. It's one thing to tell you what the matrix is. It's another thing to show you. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do here, is I'm going to show you the media matrix, the media narrative, chronologically, systematically. I'm going to show you to some extent what the one narrative was, and then what the counter narrative was. And then you can kind of start to see which one you go along with and which one maybe you don't. Now, let's have a look at the poll. Make sure you vote if you haven't already. The part that I'm quite interested in is 6%, is the bottom one, where it says, neither I believe Alec Baldwin. Only 6% of you have voted there, which you could perhaps argue that it's a skewed poll, or that the poll's not totally representative. But certainly based on that poll, it sort of feels like a minority are supportive of him. Like you would think that if you were supportive of him, the first thing you would say is, I think he's innocent. So that 6% is quite a low number, isn't it? I mean, it's not like 90%. So what we're going to do briefly now is highlight about one mainstream media story per month. And when I say one, I kind of mean dealing with one issue. So we might look at, say, 3 or 4 articles, but all dealing with the same story, basically, right? So we're going to go 1 month at a time, one story theme at a time, and then look at how it gets us to the present. So we're going to kind of go over an 11-month period, right? Does that make sense? So I first want to start, before I get to that, I want to deal with some intertextual aspects that have to do with getting ahead of the narrative, right? So we're going to do that, and then we're going to look at the narrative arc itself. So let's start off with intertextual elements, and I'm going to put that in chat just to sort of headline to say, this is what we're dealing with now, and when we get to B, you'll know we're dealing with the media narrative, just so it's clear in your minds, okay? So I'm going to leave that on until we deal with the media narrative. So do you see the pattern that's kind of taking place here in broad strokes? You go onto a major news channel, you tell your story, then you repeat your story on your own channel with its 2.4 million followers, currently 2.5 million. And then each time that he did this, the mainstream media would rebroadcast. Every time he put something on Instagram, the mainstream media would snap it up and push it out into, onto their networks, and it would add a sort of a worldwide echo to Baldwin's every comment on the case. It even made news in South Africa quite often, because he's a sort of well-known American celebrity. He's well-known around the world. So while all of that is happening, Baldwin says something, it echoes around the world, law enforcement doesn't really say anything. I'm not saying they never said anything, but compared to how much he was saying things, they were relatively silent. Would you agree with that? And so within that uneven dichotomy, Baldwin could state his case while law enforcement sort of worked quietly, and it has to be said, slowly behind the scenes. But that is how you get ahead of the narrative. And we've seen similar situations arise so often in true crime where someone at the center of an investigation influences and arguably controls the narrative, while the narrative of the investigation is silent. And I've always sort of said, why is it necessary to control a narrative? Like, why is it necessary to even do that? Can't the narrative stand up on its own 2 feet? Why is it necessary to control or to influence it, right? So if you think about this idea of getting ahead of the narrative, think about Jonbenet Ramsey, right? This is a really early article. Can you guys see that? Let's take myself out and do that. That is from January 1st, 1997, right? Jonbenet Ramsey, parents went on to CNN right in the beginning, right? Now just compare that with this. Jonbenet's parents refused second interview. That was about a year later, January 15, 1998. And so in a very basic way, what you're talking about there is someone going on to CNN or going on to the news right off the bat. But then are you talking to the police right off the bat? Are you talking to the police when they want to talk to you? Are you talking to the media when they want to? Where's the narrative actually being laid down, with law enforcement or with the media, right? So sometimes if law enforcement do try to say something, they are actually silenced. So think about the Madeleine McCann case. Look at that. Madeleine's parents lose bid to silence Portuguese cop, right? So we're also starting to see, let me bring that up so you can see that. We're also starting to see that law enforcement, the law enforcement narrative give way to the defense narrative in the Caitlin Armstrong case. Would you guys agree with that? Would you guys agree that in the Caitlin Armstrong case, it feels like the law enforcement narrative is starting to sort of almost step aside to the counter narrative, right? And then we also have the same kind of thing with Kylie Rodney. There's like a vacuum of silence from law enforcement side, and that's now filled with a cacophony, even when there isn't necessarily a perpetrator deliberately trying to influence the narrative. So if you were a newcomer to these cases, I mean, like you came to these cases today, now, right now, and you say Google Jonbenet, you Googled Madeleine McCann, you Googled Caitlin or Kylie or ALEC Baldwin, it would be easy to assume the current news as a sort of current reality. But would that be the current reality? Right? Do you follow what I'm saying? If you Googled any of these cases, including Kylie Rodney, and you came up onto a story, you'd think, well, I guess that's the current reality right now. But is that the current reality? So I think it's a mistake to think that whatever the prevailing news is, it's a kind of a default reality. Think about the default news right now in the Jonbenet Ramsey case. Is that the reality of the Jonbenet Ramsey case? And so on and so on. Think about, as we go through the timeline, which we're about to do now. Sorry, I just want to put this up. So we're now going to deal with that timeline. So what I want you to think about is, at any point, if you'd Googled ALEC Baldwin, would you have an accurate idea of what is going on based on doing that. So if you just were like, what is going on in this case, and you Googled, would the media be giving you an accurate idea? And that's not to say the media's got an agenda. It's simply the media is saying what someone else has said. It's just repeating that. And I just want to say, I worked as a journalist, and I had some thoughts that there are political agendas, and there's, I kind of expected, because I worked in a newsroom. I thought, is the news editor going to stand up and say, guys, our policy on this is that, guys, in terms of that political leader, we are all going to say this, and it never ever happened. There was nothing like, okay, guys, everyone in the newsroom, listen up. Our attitude to climate change is that it doesn't exist, or that it does exist. That never ever happened. The media is a lot dumber than you give it credit for. The media basically repeats what they are told, and they're not supposed to really interpret it. They're simply supposed to echo and get information and represent it. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm just saying when I worked in the media, in a newsroom, I was quite surprised that there wasn't some major announcement that this is how we're going to approach this. That's all. Okay. I'm not quite sure why I did that. Let me bring it back. Okay, so now we're going to deal with the mainstream media arc of the Rust apology. I'm going to try and go through it quickly and sort of effectively. So this should be quite interesting. So in the Baldwin case, it's only in the last few days that even the idea of charges have come about, right? Think about that. Just in the last few days, the idea of charges have come about, and this is after 10, 11 months, right? Do you agree with that? If you followed Rust and the Baldwin case from the get-go, and I have, as I say, I've got 82 videos already covering this case, it's difficult not to scoff when Baldwin's lawyer says the DA's office must be given the space to review this matter without unfounded speculation and innuendo. It's just kind of, for me, unbelievable to see that. Like, guys, don't make any suggestions about this case now that the charges kind of coming out, or possibly coming out. Anyway, here's the timeline of how the Rust matter has been influenced over the past 11 months, and quite naturally, the prevailing narrative is geared to reinforce the idea of Baldwin's innocence. Or you could say, is the prevailing narrative reinforcing Baldwin's innocence? It's a question. Is it or isn't it? So we're going to start at December 9, which is 6 days after the ABC News interview. Do you guys remember this? You guys remember that? Let me take that away. Remember that? So it says here, Alec Baldwin posts letter from Rust's crew on Instagram. Descriptions that set was chaotic are false. Right? Is there any innuendo there, do you think? Do you think there's any innuendo over here? Is there any attempt to steer or counter or shape speculation or to argue about what is going on set here, would you say? Now we jump to January 3rd. And Baldwin posted an almost 13-minute video, that was actually the day before, January 2nd, on Instagram, which he captioned, "Another chance to let go of anything that is hurting us." The LA Times was just one publication to echo and thus amplify Baldwin's sentiments. The LA Times repeated Baldwin's reinforcing comments that he's received goodwill and support, right? So this is a quote from that article. He says, quote, I have had more people who have been kind and thoughtful and generous of spirit than I've had people who are malignant about the death of Alina Hutchins. I'm not afraid to say that and to couch that in some euphemisms. Somebody died very tragically. And I've gotten so much, I mean, so much goodwill from people. It's just incredible. So if you went on to, if you read this article, if you hadn't really been following the story and you read this article, you'd think, wow, he's getting so much goodwill, he's getting so much support. That must mean that he didn't do anything wrong, and probably he's innocent, and probably there won't be any charges. He's being supported because he didn't do anything wrong. That would be an assumption, and I think a natural assumption to make if you looked at this article kind of in isolation, right? If you look at the poll right now, it says 5% believe Alec Baldwin. Now, all I'm trying to get at is what he said at the beginning of the year was sort of saying, I've got huge support, right? But you know how social media is, and I can tell you on my channel, I get plenty of people hating me and really, what's the word, criticizing me and undermining me and whatever. And of course, I can sit here and tell you everybody loves me and everybody thinks I'm fantastic. And that it's not a competition, right? Right now, I've got 114 people in chat. I think there's some channels there that would look at that and literally rub their hands. And if you're watching this, do you not feel glee at that low number? Do you not look at that and say, you've only got 115 people. I had 1,000 people in chat today, or 2,000 or 3,000. I've got 10 times more than you. I've got 20 times more than you. It's not a competition. Right? So obviously it does make an impact. So obviously I'm kind of straying a little bit. What I'm trying to say is that amount of support you are going to either trumpet or minimize or whatever, but that is going to be relative to this whole conversation, right? It is totally going to be relative to the conversation. And he's got, almost like Adventures with Purpose, 2.5 million followers on on Instagram. So he is influential, right? The other thing is your following aren't going to be really that critical anyway. I mean, they're your followers. But I think there are going to be some people who might be critical. What do you do with them? Do you let them have a voice, or do you control that as well? Do you control the dissent as well? What do you do? Well, I can tell you for a fact, I control very nasty dissent on my channel. There was somebody who said, I can't listen to this anymore. Well, I'll do you a favor and you don't have to comment on this channel ever again then, right? I'm sure that the same thing happens on big celebrity accounts as well. Okay, well, if you're going to be really nasty about how you feel, well, then goodbye, take care, right? So anyway, the other thing that he said then was, he said, I do want to consider very carefully in this coming year and to really push myself is trying to not allow the negativity in my life to affect me, right? He's saying, I don't want to really let the negativity affect me, but this is not negativity. Somebody died. There's an investigation. That's not negativity. You don't like go, well, I'm not going to think about that. That's negative. It's an investigation. You can't sit in court and say, yeah, but that's just negative. That's just a negative question, right? Do you think one can conflate not allowing negativity in one's life with allowing an investigation to proceed? This video was made, let me bring it back up. Is it that one? No, it's not. It's that one. No, that one. There we go. Do you think one can conflate not allowing negativity with allowing an investigation to proceed? This video was made about 2 weeks before Baldwin gave his phone to the relevant authorities. Anyway, now we are going into February. So what I want you guys to do is I'm going to go through obviously the details, but I want you to think kind of in broad strokes. February, that happened. March, that happened. April, that happened. And you don't have to kind of bother with the details so much. It's just to kind of get a basic framework of how the media narrative goes from this point forward. I'm going to try and go through it fairly quickly so that you can kind of get that sense of time moving and the narrative evolving, the media narrative evolving. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to keep February up until we get to March. In early February, news media would talk about Baldwin returning to work, and these are some of the articles. There's this one from Sky. Baldwin says it's strange to be back at work. Can you guys see that? Let me do that. Here's another one. That's 8th of February. There's another one. Baldwin returns to work after rush shooting. Returns to work, right? First project. You see that? See those words? First project. Here's another one. This is from South Africa. Alec Baldwin back at work filming new thriller. And I think it says Baldwin has returned to work almost 4 months after that. Okay. But the point is that all of this is kind of saying the same thing. He's returning to work for the first time. So that's the basic thrust of all of these stories, right? And there are a lot more. There are a lot more. So then months later in August, media was still saying that Baldwin was getting his first job. So this is February. And look at this. Alec Baldwin lands first acting job on Broadway, right? And this is in August, right? So can you see how that's already a bit of a distortion? It's like, this is the first job that I'm doing. Well, months later, it's still the first job that I'm doing, right? So a few days after Baldwin's first return to work in February, media reports indicated that there was some opprobrium about that. Some people were quite upset about that, with some people calling his sincerity into question. This is still back in February. And so there were articles like this one. Alec Baldwin's quick return to work calls sincerity into question. Right? So, well, you guys can't see that. So let's do it like that. So what I'm trying to show you guys is the narrative, like he's returning to work for his first job. And then it's not really a counter narrative, but it's a kind of an opposing narrative. I'm not terribly happy that he's returning to work. Shouldn't this or shouldn't that, right? That's just kind of like the other side to the narrative. So there were actually 3 different projects: the UK thriller, the art fraud podcast, that's this one. Can you guys see that? There it is. The art fraud podcast and a role on Broadway. All of these were referred to as Baldwin's first project since Rust. And I suppose you could argue that they were. You could say, well, that was his first acting job, and that was his first podcast job, and that was his first acting role in the UK. I suppose you could argue it that way. But I think the average person would say, okay, your first job was in February. You can't still say, I got my first job when it's August, right? Okay, so now we're going to deal with March. At a film festival in Boulder, Baldwin defends further criticism, saying that the lawsuits that were out there are only after him for his money, and the mainstream media repeat these defenses, right? So, I mean, that's definitely a aspect that I'm not sort of touching on, is the lawsuits narrative. I'm not even going there. I'm just sort of dealing with one story per month, and then maybe a sort of a counter narrative to that. So, and the other side that I'm kind of trying to emphasize is what his lawyers just said, where he says the DA's office must be given space to review this matter without unfounded speculation and innuendo. So when he's in Boulder, isn't he responding to speculation? Isn't that part of the, what's the word, the thing that shouldn't be going on? You know, don't give them space, let them investigate, right? Is speaking at Boulder and addressing those questions really helping? So anyway, it says here, why sue people if you're not going to get money, right? And so less helpfully, a few days later, not so positive news emerges that suggests Baldwin intended to finish Rust despite the death of the cinematographer and the serious injury to his director. That was this article. Alec Baldwin tried to work out a deal to finish Rust after fatal shooting. And some people weren't terribly happy about that. It also made news in South Africa. Baldwin wanted to finish Rust after fatal shooting. Okay. Are you guys following? So now we go on to April. I don't know if this narrative rings a bell with you guys. I don't know if you remember this. I hope so. Because then it'll mean a lot more as we sort of review it. So April was actually a pretty devastating month for Baldwin. Let me just do that. Especially if you consider how broadly positive the media coverage had been until basically this point, the 6-month mark. So up until now, it was basically fairly positive. If you think about this as the halfway mark, just halfway to the possible filing of charges, which is, you know, they may not happen, but if they do happen, it looks like it'll happen in October. If you say October's the finish line, well, then you would say April was kind of the 6-month mark. Do you agree with that sort of framing of it? So one of the few positive spin stories that came out in April was this one. Excuse me. It says he's been exonerated, right? Can you see that? So that's April 21st, 2022. Here's another one basically saying the same thing. Alec Baldwin's lawyer says Rust shooting probe clears the actor, right? But the negative publicity, on the other hand, was pretty shocking. Look at these headlines. This is like the counter narrative. Rust film producers were indifferent to gun safety. There's another one. Rust producers issued maximum fine. This is in a South African publication. Here's another one. Alec Baldwin, shocking reaction to being told he had killed Helena Hutchins. And so on. Here's another story from CNN. Video of Alec Baldwin's initial interview after deadly shooting released by investigators. So that's obviously giving you the law enforcement narrative. That's sort of almost resetting the narrative in a way. Do you get that? Remember this. I was the one holding the gun. New video shows the aftermath. This is from the LA Times. So do you see how now the law enforcement narrative sort of shifts back into focus? It's been, in a way, I won't say pushed aside, but it's sort of been sidelined. Now it's come back into focus. And then I think the Depp versus Heard trial sort of took over. People kind of forgot about Alec Baldwin at this point. I was covering the Baldwin case quite a lot, and people just dropped off. They were like, okay, the next true crime party is over there, right? So now let's go on to May. Let's deal with May. Do that. Okay. So in May, May seemed to be about doing damage control for what had come out in April. And so you saw this sort of thing. Let's bring it up. You saw things like this. Rust producers deny safety failures, right? And by the way, all of this took quite a long time to research and assemble. What you're seeing might look like, oh, this is really quick to put together. It was actually took quite a long time. Here's another one. Rust producers defend safety, right? So as I said, damage control. Here's another one. Alec Baldwin Rust movie contests willfully violating safety protocols, right? All along the same thing. And then you kind of got to ask, what is that thing Baldwin's lawyer said about give the DA's office space to review the matter without speculation and innuendo, right? Okay, so now let's move on to June. Okay. Let's get rid of that. Okay, now on to June. Alec Baldwin says he wants apologies when DA report on Rush shooting is released. Right, that's from Forbes. Alec Baldwin couldn't care less about allegations. That's from a South African publication. Alec Baldwin convinced he will be owed an apology after DA report into Rush shooting. Right, that's from Inside Nova. Can you guys see that? Let me just take myself out. Alec Baldwin convinced he will be owed apology after DA report into Rush shooting. Sorry, what is that thing his lawyer said? The DA's office must be given space to review this matter without unfounded speculation and innuendo. Do you think this qualifies as speculation and innuendo? On June 29th, this guy tweeted something, and Baldwin said, when I'm eventually not charged, I'll come find you so you can apologize. Do you think that there's any unfounded speculation and innuendo there? So let's now move on to July. Okay. If Baldwin was saying how much support they were getting in January, by July it seems bad press has sort of caught up with them. So have a look at this article. It says, it's from the Daily Mail. Hilaria Baldwin claims enemies have sought to destroy her husband. And then in the same month, this article appears on the website of Tyson and Mendes, an American civil litigation firm. Can you guys see that? Okay. Alec Baldwin is not accepting responsibility, and that's in reference to someone is responsible, but I know it's not me, right? Okay. So now we move on to August. Okay. 10 months after the Rush shooting, Alec Baldwin says he still thinks about it every day. And that's from this article. Okay, so I'm going to quote from this article. And I think it's just worth thinking about what Baldwin says that is, at this point in August, that is rebroadcast on a massive platform like CNN, right? And think again about that idea of innuendo and give the DA's office space so that they can reach their decision, so they can do their work. So listen to this. In an interview with CNN, Baldwin said, quote, that he doesn't believe he or anyone else will face criminal charges in the fatal shooting last year on the Rust movie set. A tragic episode, he says, has taken years of his life and has cost him professionally. I really think I need to put that in chat. So bear in mind, this is August, but I really think we need to put that in. So it's in the media narrative where he says he doesn't believe that he or anyone else, no one's going to face criminal charges. Now, once again, you had to Google, if you just didn't know what was going on, you just weren't paying attention, you were distracted, you weren't following the case, and for whatever reason, you just decided, you know what, I'm just going to look at what's going on here. And you kind of Googled Alec Baldwin, and you read this article, you would assume that the investigation just sort of fizzled out, that nothing really came of it, right? Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you assume that? That the person at the center of it says, you know what, I don't think they're going to be, I don't believe that there are going to be criminal charges for me or for anyone else. And I think technically that's true, or that technically that may be true. There may not be criminal charges, right? Okay, so we are dealing with August. Can I bring that back? Okay. So the article goes on to say, in his interview with CNN, Baldwin placed responsibility for the tragedy on Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who served as the armorer and props assistant on the film, and assistant director Dave Halls, who handed him the gun. Through their respective attorneys, both Gutierrez-Reed and Halls accused Baldwin of deflecting blame onto others, right? So it's quite interesting that that's in the article, that Gutierrez-Reed and Halls say, wow, he's deflecting blame onto others. And I suppose, is that onto us? Is it onto someone else? Anyway, so Baldwin, I think, told CNN, he said, quote, someone put a live bullet in the gun who should have known better. That was, and then this part's in brackets. So I don't know whether he said the armorer's job, but it's a reference to Gutierrez-Reed. Her job, it seems like he's quite careful not to say her name, but he says her job was to look at the ammunition and put in the dummy round or the blank round, and there wasn't supposed to be any live rounds on set. There are two people who didn't know what they were supposed to do, or didn't do what they were supposed to do. I'm not sitting there saying I want them, to go to prison, or I want their lives to be hell. I don't want that. But I want everybody to know that those are the two people that are responsible for what happened. That's the end of the quote. Let me just emphasize that in chat. I want everybody to know that those are the two people that are responsible for what happened. Yes, clearly that is what is intended there. Baldwin also wondered aloud whether Seth Kenney, the movie's prop supplier, accidentally provided live bullets to the Rust set. But then in the same month, the counter narrative, right? I don't want to see this ad. How do I get rid of it? Okay. So can you guys see that? Let me do that. This is from Rolling Stone. New Alec Baldwin shooting findings emerge as actor continues to defend himself. So that is really telling you all you need to know. New information is coming to light. Meanwhile, the actor's been defending himself kind of all along, right? It talks about a separate medical investigator's report, right? It also refers to an FBI report stating Baldwin had to have pulled the trigger for the gun to shoot. I'm just trying to get back to August. Okay. So here's another one, another kind of counter narrative. Investigation into Rush shooting has concluded findings differ from Alec Baldwin's account of the situation. So it's now August. No thanks. It's now August, right? It's now August, and it's kind of very late in the story that the sort of investigative stuff is sort of coming to light. But this is what I mean by you have this opportunity to get ahead of the narrative, right? And by the time the narrative comes out, haven't a lot of people moved on and said, oh yeah, I remember Alec Baldwin. Yeah. No, there was nothing. That was an accident. He didn't do anything wrong there, based on a sort of a cursory initial reading of the media. So if you weren't really paying attention, by the time this comes to light, it's totally gotten ahead of the narrative, right? Do you see what I'm getting at? So anyway, we are now in August, and now that kind of brings us almost up to speed with September. So let's put that in. Timmy, hold your horses. Okay. Now we deal with September. Let's take that out. So we're almost kind of up to speed with where we want to be. So towards the end of September, it's announced that Baldwin may face charges. Big surprise. It's a strange statement because for the first time, it actually implicates Baldwin in potential charges without actually going so far to say so. So it's kind of strange. It's like a statement saying, we may press charges. And it kind of also says, we may press charges against 4 people. One of them may be Alec Baldwin, and then it doesn't, I think, name the others. It's a very bizarre statement. You know what I mean? It's kind of a bizarre statement. We may press charges. So in any event, this is a far cry from April, when Baldwin confidently claimed that he was exonerated by the health and safety report. Clearly, based on these possible charges, at least he wasn't. So what I've tried to show you here is how the authentic narrative is pushed aside, suppressed, sidelined, not as a one-off article, but as a process, as a sort of campaign. Do you guys see that? In other words, it's not like one article makes a narrative. It's one after another, after another, after another, creates an overall impression. And if one article after another, plus Instagrams and whatever, if that goes unchallenged, that kind of becomes a kind of prevailing narrative until the police investigation, which is taking a lot longer and is behind the curve until that comes out. But all I'm trying to say is you're kind of making hay while the sun shines. By the time the police reports do come out, so many people have been convinced that the narrative is whatever it is, right? And if at the very least you have doubt at the end of this process where you go, well, the police report says that, but there is another side to the story. So in other words, do you follow what I'm getting at? So I think the point in these campaigns is that they do have influence. Do you guys agree with that? If you had to say, does this have any impact? Is there any influence to it? I think the answer is yes, they do have an influence. They can and do work. The court of public opinion is real and is often used to solicit public sympathy and support. Do you guys get that? The court of public opinion is real, and some people are purposefully appealing to that court even before a potential case is heard. It's almost like an appeal before your trial, right? So I wanted to show you just how crucial the media narrative is to a case, not just that narrative, but the timeline of that narrative. Besides chasing clues and evidence, the timing and context of the media narrative is also a powerful weapon, showing intentionality. Even the strategic intentionality of a potential suspect gives you a much deeper sense of who they are and how they deal with a given situation, in this case, their situation. Right, in terms of this case. This ongoing response in the media, is it honest? Is it sincere? Is it consistent? Is it passive or is it aggressive or is it a little bit of both? So let me bring this up. Do it like that. Okay. So the media timeline is often one of the best, if not the best, pieces of evidence revealing the psychological dynamics in deeper, more holistic detail. It's a difficult SOB to unravel. When you've got all of these ropes and threads and string, which one of these is the authentic narrative? I mean, it's filled with knots and tangents and frayed sections, right? If you want to find your way to the thread of truth, where do you even begin, right? And so kind of what I'm getting at is if you come into a story late, that's what faces you. All of these threads, all of these kind of narratives, all of these things woven, and it can be quite difficult to kind of go, okay, where's the thread in this when you come at the other end? That's why it's always good. It's always really a powerful thing when you can see a case in real time, right? It's not always like that. Sometimes having the benefit of hindsight can kind of also help you. I really don't know if you were following the Jonbenet Ramsey case in real time, where that would have taken you, given how information came out there. So I think it's relative. But who has the patience to work through all of that when there's so much of it, right? And who's got the precision mindset to be able to discern the real narrative from all of this within this mess? The above analysis, The above analysis, or the analysis I've just dealt with, only dealt with about one basic story per month. There were dozens, if not hundreds more, maybe not hundreds, but maybe 100 more. And that's aside from the social media and the paparazzi stuff. Maybe there were hundreds more. Do you remember Baldwin's comment about the Rust production being a very, very well-oiled machine? Do you remember this? That was the 30th of October. That was 9 days. Let's bring that up. This was 9 days after the incident, which happened. It happened on October 21st. This was Baldwin talking to the paparazzi on October 30th, 2021. He said it was a very, very well-oiled machine. So if charges are forthcoming for as many as 4 people, was it a very well-oiled machine? as early as October last year, Baldwin, in response to questions from reporters, says, "I'm not allowed to make any comments. I've been ordered by the Sheriff's Department in Santa Fe. I can't answer any questions about the investigation." Exactly. I mean, isn't that what his lawyer said just a few days ago? He said, "The DA's office must be given the space to review this matter without unfounded speculation and innuendo." That's what he said at the time. Sorry, that's what his lawyer said now. Sorry, that's what his lawyer said now. At the time, he said, "I'm not allowed to make any comments." You know, this was end of October. I'm not allowed to make any comments. Of course, a month after this impromptu interview, I think it was in Vermont, Baldwin went onto ABC and he did exactly that. He made comments, he addressed questions about the incident. And the rest, you know, the rest is history. So do you see how interesting just the study of the media arc is, the media timeline? See how interesting that is in giving you a better idea of who someone is. Not one story at a time, but collectively, putting all the stories together. So I think one's got to ask, what is the authentic narrative in this case? What's the true story in this case? What really happened? Is it the media narrative? Is the media narrative the true story? Is it one particular dimension to the media narrative? Is it one dimension within the context of another? It's an important question to ask. What is the authentic narrative? And ask that question repeatedly. What is the authentic narrative? And that's something that stood me in good stead as a true crime writer from the very first the very first books on Oscar Pistorius, Jodi Arias, Jonbenet Ramsey, and on and on and on. What is the authentic narrative, right? And that word authentic was one that really stayed with me. And I think it's the most important word, I would argue, in true crime, is that for true crime to be valuable, meaningful, worthwhile, it needs to be authentic. If true crime is false, fake, sensational, all those other things, right, then it is not really true crime, or it's certainly not authentic true crime. And I get a lot of derision. The most authentic voice in true crime. What the F are you talking about? And I get it. I get that the popular true crime now is all of that stuff. Let's speculate. Let's have fun with this. Let's be entertained with, could it be this one or could it be that one? And I think right now on a channel that I looked at, there's this effort to pursue. Anyway, when I was watching, a particular teenager associated with the whole Kylie Rodney case, is that authentic true crime? And I think what I've had to acknowledge is that, unfortunately, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's authentic. It doesn't matter if it's true. It doesn't matter if the fake story doesn't go anywhere as long as it's interesting. Let's all get together and belong to this crowd, and that's really going to be fun, and it's a nice way to spend our time. That guy there is so boring. He speaks with a monotone, blah, 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 blah. It is quite difficult to be interesting and exciting when you're trying to stick to the facts religiously. It is quite difficult to show personality and to be witty when you're trying to concentrate and stay focused on that authentic narrative. It's difficult to be titillating and amusing when in your mind you're actually trying to hold on to that thread that is so difficult to hold on to. that you have these constant forces of corruption and smoke and mirrors. You know, it is the stock and trade of those who are guilty to confuse you and to murk up the situation. Defense lawyers try to raise doubt, right? And it's quite heartbreaking in the situation of true crime where you work so hard to try and find that thread, to find that golden thread, and the people around you are playing to the circus of, could it be this, could it be that, it's so interesting, let's talk about this, and we are allowed to speculate. And so someone is trying to find the truth about something, just as it's almost a hopeless task. It's a hopeless task. And you know, there's that saying, when you, I'm not quite sure how it goes exactly, but in a situation of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. I feel a lot like that. I really feel a lot like that. I feel like we are living in a time of universal deceit. You might say, if you watching this and you're a creator, you might say, I'm not deceiving anyone. I'm just sort of playing the YouTube game. It's a business. You know, it's speculation, right? Yeah, but it's not authentic, right? And I get that. Look at my numbers right now on the show. You could say, yeah, but you've got 114 people watching. Authenticity is actually meaningless. You could also argue authenticity matters, but you don't. The authentic narrative and the truth matters, but you don't. Who are you? Do you think that you're the all-knowing, or you know better than we are? So that's certainly an argument. You could certainly make the argument that you're not credible, you're arrogant, you think you know everything. You can make all of those arguments. Well, then that is definitely an argument. The other argument is, are we trying to be authentic as a community about something that is really serious? Criminality. And the problem is, if you're not, if something that has got to do with truth and justice, you can't even be truthful about that, then there's really no hope for us. There's no hope for us. So in other words, in the last place where truth can sort of be protected, which is what justice is all about, which is why I studied law, you sort of feel like that's our last defense against the forces of corruption, that there's actually a system of rules that's meant to protect us from harm, from evil. And then you say, that actually doesn't matter. Let's make the court of public opinion. Let's make justice our own brand of justice. If we want that person to be guilty, they're guilty. And that may sound like a fun idea until it happens to you, until you are Sammy Smith, until you are Amber Heard, until you are one of the suspects that you're so quick to identify. Paddy Dunn says, I don't normally get to listen to a live stream. Thanks for your work. Thanks for that. I think that's the only super chat I've gotten in an hour, right? So if you're a creator watching this, cue rub your hands, because it's like, you're not at my expense. What you are doing is definitely not at my expense. So a long time ago, in a country far, far away, I started this process of studying what I call the authentic narrative. The authentic narrative is the objective reality hidden beneath the distortion, the noise, the pageantry, and the posturing. Whether we can decipher it or not, it's there, right? And I've always had tremendous hope about that. So, like, even if you can't find your way to it, it's there. Right? So you might say, you're an idiot. The authentic narrative is out there. I'll be able to find it. Maybe you can't. That's great. As long as you stay curious and as long as you keep asking, is this really the authentic narrative? And also, does this make sense? Then anybody can find their way to it. Let me say that again. Anybody who says, and this is about anybody, I think what you're saying is trash or garbage, or I don't really have any respect for it. I'm going to go and find out for myself. I'm going to apply this scout mindset. I'm going to be curious and I'm going to find out for myself. That's great, right? You should be thinking for yourself. You should be trying to find out for yourself whether something makes sense, not because somebody told you, right? So what I've found, take it for what you like. If I've learned anything covering this genre, only a select few are able to find their way to that golden thread of the authentic narrative. That's just been my experience. I've looked at a lot of cases, Jonbenet Ramsey, Madeleine McCann. I've written books about those cases as well. And I've found, to my surprise, to be honest, like when I covered Jonbenet Ramsey, I was really quite terrified and intimidated. I thought, what can I possibly contribute? You know, how can I compete with all these other journalists and writers and people that I respect? How can I compete with them? And whether you think so or not, and whether the world thinks so or not, I was quite surprised. Wow, I actually did have something to say. I did have something to contribute. I had an American co-author, and she felt the same way about our work, right? And it wasn't just that case, it was many cases. And it's not really, I'm not trying to sort of blow my own horn and say I'm great. I'm trying to say anybody who pays attention for long enough and consistently enough, for example, looking at the media narrative, anyone who applies some of these classic true crime techniques in a sort of intelligent, careful way, and who cares about the subject matter, you are going to come up with these really incredible insights. You are going to find your way to that golden thread, to that authentic narrative. In other words, not really rocket science. It is quite rare, though, because not everyone wants to put in the effort to do that. So let me ask you, with the Rust incident, do you think the authentic narrative is the narrative of law enforcement or the prosecutors or someone else? Let me say that again. In this particular case, is the authentic narrative, do you think, the narrative of law enforcement / the prosecutors, or is it someone else or somewhere else, right? Now, with that context in mind, and please keep it in mind, we're going to read the statement from Baldwin's attorney, released a few days ago. Okay, let's just bring that up. Sorry, my voice has gone a little bit. I must say I'm impressed that I've kept this very brief. It's only an hour and 15. Okay, so here we go. Alec Baldwin's attorney, Luke Nickus of Quinn Emanuel, has responded to the recent news from Santa Fe District Attorney Mary Carmack Altwies, who in an August 30 letter requested the New Mexico Board of Finance for $635,000. That money, more than $500,000, to prosecute as many as 4 individuals with criminal and homicide charges. Now, what's quite interesting with that is it seems to show there may well be criminal charges. I think there will be civil charges, but there may well be criminal charges as well. Someone may be criminally liable. So going back to the article, the DA said in her letter that one of the possible defendants is well-known movie actor Alec Baldwin. This has spurred the media to draw false conclusions. That is what Baldwin's lawyer said. This has spurred the media to draw false conclusions. Do you think there were any false conclusions drawn during the ABC interview or in many of those Instagram posts? Then the article goes on to say, as previously reported, Carmack Altwies received $317,000, so about half the amount that she asked for, to proceed with her charging in the Rust tragedy. Then Nickus goes on So this is another quote from Nickus, Baldwin's lawyer. He says, during my communications with the DA's office just a few weeks ago, after the August 30 funding request was submitted, I was told that it would be premature to discuss the case because they had not yet received the file or deliberated about their charging decision. Now, what do you think about that? That whole thing of we're not going to talk about this because it's under investigation, or it's, I don't want to jeopardize my client's case. We've actually just heard that with Cake and Armstrong. Do you notice how, and you also see this in the Kylie Rodney case, do you notice how certain very simple yes/no questions, I can't really answer that because it's part of an ongoing investigation. And Baldwin, I think, also said that when he was beside the road, he was asked something, right? But then other things you are willing to talk about. I'm just saying it's this weird thing where the things you do want to talk about that help your case, I'm very happy to talk about. But as soon as it's not, oh, it's part of an ongoing investigation and we need to be respectful. Oh, okay, that's interesting. All I'm saying is notice when that happens. Notice when someone is doing that. Okay. Anyway, so he goes on to say, it is irresponsible to report otherwise. Yeah, Karen, that's the word. The DA has made clear that she has not received the sheriff's report or made any decisions about who, if anyone, might be charged in this case, added the attorney, who said back in April that the Rust report exonerates his client. So do you think that's true? He says the DA has made clear she has not received the sheriff's report. I think that may be true. But do you think it's true that the DA has not made any decisions about who, if anyone, might be charged? Do you think the DA really doesn't have any idea who they might charge in the case? Let me ask that again. Do you think the DA, like right now, it's sort of September going into October, also they've asked for more than $500,000 to prosecute. Do you think they've got no idea who they want to prosecute? Eh? So this is a headline from the New York Times. It says, Alec Baldwin and others could face charges in Rust shooting, DA says. Again, do you think they have no idea who they want to prosecute? Said Nickus, the DA's office must be given the space to review this matter without unfounded speculation and innuendo. I don't know how many times I've read that now, but it's been a few times. But within that context, this, all of these social media posts, and look at his statistics. Have you guys seen this? Alec Baldwin follower status, this is for Instagram. He started the year at about 2.4 million, and he's now at around about 2.5 million. So yeah, that's my spiel for today. That is it. So I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found the whole dealing with the media narrative quite interesting. I don't know whether it translates as well to video as when you're reading it. When you see those stories, when you see the dates and you see it in that sense. I don't know. You guys can maybe tell me. So I'm going to take a couple of questions, and I sort of want to be out of here in about 10, 11 minutes. So let's see what you guys say. Let's have a look at the poll. If you haven't voted in the poll, make sure that you do. Let's bring that back up. So right now, 7% say, I believe Alec Baldwin. And how much speculation and innuendo would you say has been in the media narrative? 15% say very little. From Baldwin himself, quite a lot. 40% say that. And that's the highest. Most of you are saying there's a lot of speculation and innuendo in the media narrative from Baldwin himself. It's quite an interesting result there. Definitely quite an interesting result. Okay. Clodus says the simplest explanation tends to be the correct one. Not with the Nord Stream 2 situation. I must say, what I said in the previous live, I think I've changed my mind. I think I've changed my mind. I've gotten some more information, and I think I'm changing my mind on that score. Robin says, do you believe the truth will come out? Do you mean in terms of Baldwin? Yeah, I think it has been coming out over this year. I think a lot of information has come out already. Body cam, we've seen statements in the interview rooms, we've gotten access to the lots of police statements. So we really have gotten quite a lot of information. So if you guys are interested in, if you guys are new to this, if you haven't really looked at the, what do you call it, the Baldwin case in a lot of detail, if you want to follow this playlist, it's got 82 videos on it. I covered this from the word go, from the December 3rd interview at least. And so I covered it in real time. And so what I actually want to do is taking 2 or 3 videos at a time. Thanks so much, Yvonne. Really, I appreciate that, especially given the indignation that I think I expressed in this video. But that's also just being authentic. That's how I feel. That indignation is definitely real, and I think it's appropriate. It's appropriate to feel not very happy. And there's certain things you can do. You can adapt. You can improve. But the other side is your audience. Are your audience being discerning? Are your audience being fair? Of course, I can only control myself. I can only try and make what I do better, more effective, and try and make sure that I'm listenable, not this monotone voice. And the other side is you also can only do so much. You shouldn't try and turn yourself inside out just to please other people. I mean, if you are what you are and people don't like that, well, then that's a truth in itself. I'm prepared to live with that. So, I'm also prepared not to be on YouTube all the time. So YouTube said, you know what, thanks, but no thanks. I can accept that. It's not like I'm in denial. I can definitely take that and say, got it. I got the message. Thanks. Okay. So why wouldn't they use a replica? Steve Yeager says, I own and use Colt replica revolvers, and thus the accident was easily prevented. Something I saw while I was researching the story was Baldwin was making a very strong argument to say, or very not strong argument, but a very strident argument to say I didn't pull the hammer back. I didn't pull the hammer all the way back. I pulled it as far back as I could without cocking it. That was kind of his argument. If you know these particular firearms, you know that you can't pull it very far because it sort of got a quarter cock, half cock, and fully cocked, right? So I would imagine it's very hard to pull it back before the quarter cock position. But I think that's an interesting argument that if he did and let it go, could it go off? In other words, could it fire between the quarter cock position and the the resting position? So I don't know if Steve, I don't know if you can address that question. I don't know if you would know the answer to that. I appreciate that Clodis said I got a lot of information from this channel. So I am thinking about, I don't know what you think about this, Clodis. I'm thinking about, and I did this with the Barry Morphew case, a kind of a refresher as you go into possibly a trial, right? So that we go through some of the, so there are 82 videos, going through 3, 4, 5 videos at a time, not the entire video, just short little sections, short little highlights that I'll kind of select. You guys are also free to select them, and then sort of talk about that. And we can maybe do that once a week. We go through 5 videos at a time in a shortish video, maybe an hour, half an hour, an hour, and we go through 5 videos at a time, but in order, in the chronological order, and we deal with certain of those subtle things that you miss: photos, footage, statements, all that kind of thing. Clodis says, I did not want to believe he did it intentionally, but I just can't see any other way. I don't think he did it intentionally. I don't think he fired intentionally at all. So I don't see that as intentional. Let's do a quick poll here. How many of you think that the lead actor in Rust intentionally fired at Helena? It's just so if you think he did, put a 1. If you think he didn't, put a 2. Let's have a look at that. How many of you think that the lead actor in Rust intentionally fired at Helena? I don't think it was intentional. So it's good to see you guys don't either. So if I don't see any ones, and I think that's good to see, because that's totally different. But even if it's totally unintentional, that aspect, it doesn't mean that there's no legal consequence. You know, there could be other protocols, other violations. You could also have other things taking place in this production, right? Safety issues, previous safety issues that give precedent to that. That's, I think, what's also being looked at. Coda says, I think it was intentional. Okay, well, we have a different opinion on that. Susanna says, I think so let me put that in a different way. I'm talking about the intention to shoot Helena. That's the intention I'm talking about. I'm not asking, do you think he intended to pull the trigger? I'm not asking that. I'm asking, do you think he intended for Helena to get hurt? Do you think he intended for his director to get hurt? That's really the question. The question, did he intend to pull the trigger, is, I think, a legally sensitive question, which I think I will certainly leave to the court to argue at this point. That's a really good point, Stephanie. Stephanie says, and that's kind of a rumor that came across that we never really found satisfying certainty about. Was there plinking? There was talk about plinking. Was there, wasn't there, right? Okay, so I'm not going to take it further than that. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here in chat, and for being here for this episode. I don't really want to go past 90 minutes. I did want to make it kind of a concise analysis. I do want to deal with Kylie Rodney, but not. I probably won't today. There is something I want to talk about tomorrow, the seventh clue we all missed. And then Caitlin Armstrong, I want to do 2 more episodes dealing with the analysis there. No one was really interested in the first, but I found it interesting. So I'll probably be doing a part 2. I already put that on Patreon. It really is interesting how a defense lawyer presented with this. What does he do with that? And that kind of thing, I think, really is educational for when you're presented with a certain set of circumstances. How can you change the narrative, or how can you challenge the narrative? I just find that really, really interesting. And then there's also Gabby Petito. So I think I'm going to be doing a couple of episodes on Gabby Petito, even though the last episodes I've done, no one really seemed to be interested either. But I want to look at Gabby Petito from 2 or 3 perspectives that are fairly unusual. I've also noticed something in the Lifetime footage that I really want to draw your attention to, that I think will be really, really interesting. I think it's something no one's really thought about. And you only think about it when you have a dramatization, or I wouldn't say that because I had thought about it, but you don't think about it as much until you see the dramatization. So that's one thing I want to touch on. I also want to touch on the whole idea of too soon in terms of Gabby Petito. Anyway, so we'll look at that. And then there's a third thing that I want to do, but I won't say that because it's not a competition on YouTube, but if I say it, might end up being a bit of a competition. So you'll see it when it comes out, but I do intend to do a little bit of a mini revisiting of the Gabby Petito case over the next day or 2. So look out for that. Okay, that is it from me. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thanks a lot for those super chats, especially Yvonne Phillips. Really appreciate that. Just in terms of October, the Van Gogh letters will be making a bit of a comeback, at least once a week. And I'm thinking of doing an audio book on an Amanda Knox book, an audio book beginning the process of that for October. Remember, at the end of October is when we go into the Meredith Kercher case. I think it'll be good to take that route. That's the idea anyway. Yeah, so the Lifetime movie comes out tomorrow. So that's also something I want to look at, and look at the movie itself and then see what comes out of that. Personally, I don't think the actress, this is my own opinion, she basically looks like Gabby, but I wish she was younger, because that's kind of the big, not the biggest insight, but I think it's quite important that Gabby was 22. I think that her age and immaturity played into how things happened. I think if she was more experienced with the opposite sex, with having a partner, she may have been able to see that this is not a good relationship. Sometimes it takes a couple of relationships to realize, well, that was a really bad relationship. When you're in it, you may not necessarily realize it. Anissa says, later truth seeker. I appreciate that. Okay. Yeah, Paddy, I'm sure you're pretty pleased about that. And so the last thing I want to say is it's quite sad. The finch, not the finch, the weaver bird that has been building nests feverishly, must have built 7, 8 nests. He's left the building. So I feel a little bit like that bird. I've worked so hard, and I sort of feel like I don't really have that much to show for it. But that it does happen. There's not always a happy fairy tale. You may work diligently, but the gods don't smile on you, and that's life. And you must find another tree or another garden or another whatever to invest your energy in, right? That's the other side. Don't stay in a garden where your nests are being, not coming to fruition, where your nests are being destroyed or torn apart or not appreciated or whatever. Go somewhere else and try again somewhere else, right? Okay. I think that's quite a nice neutral but nevertheless affirmative note to end this on. Don't you think? It's quite a it's not a self-pitying thing. It's a natural thing, it's nature. So, we don't actually have to feel one way or the other. You can simply say that's life in a way. Deal with it. Respond appropriately, right? See the reality for what it is. Don't necessarily take it personally, although it feels pretty personal, and then, take corrective action. And you are responsible for that. You're responsible for how you react. You're responsible for how you respond, or if you don't, or if you respond badly, or whatever, right? Whew, okay. Patty says, you have our loyalty and appreciation. Thanks a lot. Roses are red says, thanks, Nick, for all the information. So obviously, if ALEC Baldwin, more news comes out, I will be covering it. But in lieu of between then and now, or now and then, I'm going to start sort of going through some of these episodes on the playlist. I think that's going to be very interesting. And if that is successful, I might do that with other playlists as well, long playlists that we've dealt with. So we'll look at that. Okay, guys, thanks again very much. Cheers, peeps, as Paddy Dunn says. If you in the UK, it's past your bedtime, make sure you go to sleep. Terry, good to see you here, although I think you may have joined a little bit late, but it's good to see you here. If you're in America, enjoy the rest of your evening, stay safe, and see you next time. Thanks a lot for that parting shot. Take care, guys. Ciao.